Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us today for On Rage, Love, and Liberation. I am Jason MacArthur, the events coordinator for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Before we start, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. You are welcome to participate in the event chat, and we love hearing from you. But if you prefer to watch the event without the chat on, you can turn it off by clicking Hide Chat at the bottom of the chat box. You can turn it back on by clicking Show Chat at any time if you want to participate in the chat. We'll have a Q&A after the conversation tonight. Please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form. We're posting the link to that form in the chat now. Our presenters will pull from those questions at the end, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. If you have any technical issues, please post that in the chat as well. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Lama Rod Owens and Charles Stevens, and then we'll get right to the talk. Charles Stevens has been engaged in social justice movement work for over 15 years, working with a wide range of organizations, including HIV, LGBT, racial justice organizations, and the arts. Currently, he serves as the executive director of the Counter Narrative Project, which he founded in 2014. He is also a member of HIV Racial Justice Now and the Alliance Theater Advisory Board. The anthology he co-edited, Black Gay Genius, was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. His writings have appeared in AJC, Atlanta Magazine, Creative Loafing, and The Advocate. Lama Rod Owens is a Buddhist minister, author, activist, yoga instructor, and authorized Lama in the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism, and is considered one of the leaders of a generation of Buddhist teachers. He holds a Master of the Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School and is co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. Owens is the co-founder of Bhumis Parsha, a Buddhist tantric practice and study community. He has been published in Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, Tricycle, and the Harvard Divinity Bulletin, and offers talks, retreats, and workshops in more than 7 countries. And now, let me turn it over to Charles and Lama Rod.
Hey, Lama Rod.
Hey, girl, what's up?
Let's just get right to it, huh?
Let's chop it up. Let's get to it.
As I was thinking about what to say to you and how to start this conversation, I kind of feel like we've been having just one long conversation throughout our friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And we initially, and I should perhaps provide some background, I think how we initially thought the conversation would go, we started talking about it maybe a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
A lot has changed
Mm-hmm.
since we initially started thinking through this conversation, including the events of last week and the violence that we all witnessed with the siege at the Capitol. Many of us have, I think, struggled to think through what's happening. I think a lot of us have even sought to find meaning for ourselves, for our communities. Of course, there's a lot of anger and rage, which I think is part of the spirit of this evening. And I was just wondering, just to get us started, if you could provide just some reactions to all of what's happening.
Yeah, this is a time of things falling apart, and I call this time the apocalypse, or at least an apocalypse, right? But the apocalypse means unveiling, it means revelation, actually. The truth is being revealed, right? And the truth takes training to be in relationship with, and not all of us have the training to be in a relationship with the truth, nor are we interested in doing the work to train to be in a relationship to the truth. So we're going to be having very different experiences across the board, and everything that's coming up for us as we're living through this moment, as we live through the past years, we continue to live into this new year. Everything that's arising for us is supposed to be arising, right? The rage, the anger, the despair, the sorrow, the terror, the surprise, the shock, the utter disappointment, the trauma, all that is supposed to be happening. But the question that we should be wrestling with is, can I really be in relationship to what's arising, no matter how strong or ambiguous it may seem, right? No matter what arises, can I touch it? Can I be with it? Can I hold space for it, right? Because that's going to determine how I enter into an experience of liberation. For me, I would just say for me, people look at me and they go, oh, after all these years, you should be, you should be enlightened by now. You shouldn't be angry. You shouldn't be traumatized, But my experience is the experience of being human. And so to be human means that I experience fear, that I experience trauma, that I experience rage, I experience disappointment. And my work as a practitioner is to simply show up to those experiences and to allow those experiences to move through my mind, to move through my body in whatever way is appropriate.
I really appreciate you taking us there, because part of what I've struggled with is, what does it mean in this moment to be an activist, to be a leader, to be a movement leader, and to be able to be vulnerable, to have a sense of despair? I know one of the things I've often felt is that when you're a leader, people sometimes, you're in this amazing position to be able to provide comfort, to be able to provide answers. But what happens when you're not sure? What happens when you confront your own feelings of despair? And how do you get up and get in front of that computer? And also, what does it mean? I mean, one of the decisions I've made for myself is, as a leader, I want to be vulnerable. I don't want to be robotic. I don't want to disconnect myself from my own humanity. And sometimes it can be messy, and sometimes you show up. But I was wondering if you could just kind of react. So I imagine there are folks that might lead organizations, or might be in activist spaces. Like, what does it mean to be able to both have a sense of agency and empowerment, but also still be able to be vulnerable and be connected, as you say, to your humanity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start off by saying that, like, vulnerability is one of the tools that we use to dismantle systems of oppression, of power and hierarchy, right? Vulnerability helps me to be open, but more specifically, it helps me to adapt. It helps me to be fluid, right? It helps me to push against experiences of rigidity, of settling, of getting stuck, right? But that vulnerability is essentially telling the truth of what we're experiencing in the moment. And I think when we talk about leadership, there are many people who practice a kind of leadership style where it's the opposite of vulnerability. It's actually a performance of a kind of stability, or a performance of a kind of shutdownness, that no matter what happens, you keep going, right? You don't show weakness. Like, you don't let people see you stumble or have doubts, right? And I mean, that's a kind of leadership that I choose not to practice, because that's harmful for me. That's an act of violence against myself. Like, when I can't just show up in public and say, you know what, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's happening for me. And you know what, I can't help you right now, actually. And I think one of the bravest things that we can do as leaders is to set a boundary and to let people know that, like, yeah, I can't do more than this, because I am terrified. I am experiencing my own trauma. Like on last week, sitting and watching, the riot, the siege, everything happening at the Capitol, I made a choice in that moment not to go on social media, not to say anything, not to reach out to students, not to reach out to my spiritual community, but to hold space for myself, because that's what I needed. If I can't hold space and be vulnerable with myself, I have nothing to offer people. I don't know how to tell you the truth if I can't tell myself the truth first. But then on the other side, so it's the leaders, right? But we have to step to the other side and look at how we function as followers, right? And the expectations that we force on our leaders, that our leaders can't be vulnerable because we need them to be strong. Like we need them to be solid because we're actually depending on them. Like we're using their stability to gain a sense of stability for ourselves. Like we're using other people's strength to hang on to. But if the leader that I'm with is experiencing this kind of vulnerability, openness, this kind of like falling apart, then what do I have left to hold on to? If this person can't do it, how in the hell can I do it? How in the hell can I get up and keep going and being resilient if this person who I have seen as a leader can't do it? Right? And I just think that like we have to be actually honest, with what we need and what we want. And I think one of the things that we're intensely afraid of is emotions. As the Bee Gees sang and as Destiny's Children's covered, it's like emotions taking me over, caught up in sorrow, loss in the song, right? And it's like when we get emotional, we lose control. And we want to stay in control. So we want to get away from that emotionality and shut down and get numb, right? I think that lies at the heart of patriarchy, is that shutting down around emotion. I call it emotional fluidity and emotional maturity,
Yeah, also, I kind of also think about it as a triumph of capitalism,
Yeah.
internalization of these neoliberal principles.
Mhm.
I'm a brand. My brand is strong Black leader, strong Black man.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
My brand,
Yeah.
I think I do wonder as we continually think of ourselves not as human beings, but as products that can be sold on the market, and we have an investment. I do wonder if it becomes harder to be messy and complex and nuanced because we're there's a certain kind of consistency. And as you're also sharing, I am fascinated by the fact that we're both from the came of age in the South, came of age in Georgia, you in Rome, Georgia, me in Atlanta, and we also grew up connected to the church, church communities, and I'm thinking about that tradition of testimony and testifying. I almost wonder if we need to have some of that now. This moment we talk about truth telling, I think there's a kind of a power in giving testimony to us bearing witness and being able to express that, being vulnerable even in those moments.
Yeah, it's the expression of prophetic vision, which is what we come out of.
Absolutely.
This is something that I've learned a lot from Cornel West. This kind of deep prophetic vision. Who is just one of my mentors and professors, and in graduate school, who on one hand talks a whole bunch of shit, but on the other hand, like embraces you with this kind of radical, like intense, liberatory love that like I've never experienced, from this kind of person, like this icon for many of us. And the prophetic vision is, I think, one of the deep strengths of our community. And I think that prophetic vision has even been stronger within Black, queer, gay, lesbian, trans culture as well, within the subculture of the Black community, because we have been closer to our truth, right? It's the people who are closest to truth are those who have been marginalized from the center and occupy the margins.
I mean, I think part of that is, I think for so many of us, being connected to truth isn't just a choice, it's our survival.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so many of us have walked up to the abyss and faced so much, and we learned that our ability to survive is deeply connected to our ability to be to tell the truth about ourselves, to be honest, to a level of self-awareness that other folks perhaps, and maybe that's one of the conditions of privilege in a society, an ability to disconnect from any kind of self-awareness.
Yeah. And that's our liberation, is to reside in that truth, no matter how difficult that is, because we know what the consequences are.
Let's go a little deeper on radical love, on revolutionary love in this moment. Again, this moment of such despair, this moment of anger, of trauma, seeing Confederate flags all over the that kind of thing. But I still, and perhaps this is me being utopian. I mean, I still want to be connected to joy. I still want to be connected to pleasure. I want to be connected to love. And if you could just talk a bit about how do we, in these times, these moments that we're in, still stay connected to a sense of radical, and what does radical love mean now?
It's for me, radical love is really about the capacity for me to always remember that everyone is suffering, no matter how violent and ugly people get on TV with their words and with their actions, right? That person too is suffering. I know sometimes we like to get into this rhetoric of labeling people evil. They're evil, which I just think that's a lazy thing to do. Because once you label someone evil, you stop doing labor to actually understand the complexity of people, right? That people are coming into the world under different circumstances, right? They're being indoctrinated with different ideas, different values, different narratives, right? Like I always say, we weren't all born woke.
You weren't born woke. You weren't. Are you sure you weren't?
Well, my brand is. In my brand, I say that I'm born woke. But real talk.
Hashtag born woke.
That's right. Listen, we all come from somewhere.
we all have a story.
That's right. What did Jill Scott sing? What did she say? Sometimes we have to swim up the stream. And I've had to swim up that stream. To get shit together. But radical love means that first and foremost, I recognize that you are a human being going through a process, right? I don't have to agree with that process. I don't even have to be around for you to go through your process. But first and foremost, I need to recognize that you're going through a process, a very common, normal process, right? And to realize that maybe you're not perhaps doing a really good job of working through that process, but there's still a process happening first and foremost. Secondly, I have to say, you know what, I'm going to look at your process. I don't want to judge you, but I need to actually identify what I need. And what I need is not to be in proximity to your process, because your process is going to get me killed. Or whatever you're doing to be in relationships, the work of that process is going to get me killed.
I want to dig a little deeper on this radical love piece and turn it inward. How are we to love ourselves when we see so many instances where the world seems to hate us? How do we do that?
I think for me, I just think about my process, right? And you're one of these people in my life who knew me before my enlightenment. Who knew me as a student, activist, organizer in a small southern town.
TMZ, if you're listening, I have lots of tea and gossip about Lama Rod. No.
I remember back then, if you came to me and talked about self-love, I would be like, whatever, fuck you. So when I think about the journey that I've had to move into, the process, right, that I've had to move into to experience, just a little bit of insight and experience of self-love, it had to begin with actually stepping away from what the world had to say about me. It's actually doing the work of no longer believing in what the world was trying to say about me, creating that boundary and saying, you know what, I can't, I can't dig this anymore. I can't get with this anymore. And then you're able to turn that intention inward. But it's more than just this individual thing, because this is also a communal process. Like, I relied on people, elders, colleagues, contemporaries, many people in my life. I relied on those folks who were already doing this work to hold space for me as I turn inward, to move into developing a relationship with the things that I couldn't stand about myself, right? And that process of radical love for self is first and foremost, when you get to that point, is letting everything be there. The ugliness, the darkness, the pettiness, the drama, the hurt, the trauma. Letting everything be there. That's what we call holding space. Holding space is recognizing, noticing, and then disrupting your reactivity. So when I see these parts of myself that I'm just really uncomfortable with, I let go of my reactivity and I allow myself to feel that discomfort. And I sit through it. And I had to do that for years and years. And that is the heart of radical love, is holding space, moving through this utter I call it utter disappointment, this utter heartbreak, this deep, intense, visceral kind of discomfort. And to know that you can survive feeling into that, again, with the help of community, in my case, with the help of teachers, with the help of elders, with the help of friends who were functioning as mirrors for me, reflecting my work back to me over and over again. You need mirrors. You need people in your life who function as these folks who are just like bouncing your work back to you. Instead of absorbing your work, which is what we call enabling. They say, no, actually, that's your work. You need to look at where you need to be holding space for yourself. I will be here supporting you, but you need to do the labor to get free, right? And that labor to get free, first and foremost, is holding space for ourselves, right? And then that allowing ourselves to be, and that allowing ourselves to be actually begins to disrupt the narratives that the world has about us. When the world says, oh, you're ugly, you're fat, blah, 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 right? Then you say, well, but my experience is a little different than what you're saying, because the narratives that the world has about me comes from a place of deep discomfort, of deep insecurity, right? It comes from an intent to use violence to maintain order, rigidity, normality. And that's how systems perpetuate themselves, when we all get in line, and when we're just performing versions of the person in front of us, and they're performing a version of the person in front of them, and so forth. But we're all just like becoming like these soldiers who just fall in line, and to disrupt the system, we have to step out of line. We have to disrupt that rigidity, that uniformity.
And there's something very beautiful about that when you actually disrupt these systems. I couldn't help but think about, as you talked about self-love, how I think so many of us are able to convince ourselves that we've achieved that, right? We're able to perform a version of ourselves that is very, perhaps an idea we have of ourselves, what we want to achieve, but then there's still at times residue in there, still sometimes in our interior worlds. I wouldn't say hidden, but definitely just these subtle messages that kind of that sometimes they're not always super present, but then they manifest at other times. But I'm so inspired by just thinking through just the value of making yourself uncomfortable, because I think that's where the real work begins. So you can perform a version of yourself, a very highly functional part of yourself, but it's not until you get into those uncomfortable moments that you're able to really exercise those muscles and really see how much where you are. It's an amazing test in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it, and I think that I think what I see also is that people think that they're being authentic in themselves, but in fact, they're actually performing into the expectations of others around them. So there's an illusion of authenticity, but in fact, it's just a kind of a performance. It's a drag, right? It's a performance that fits into the expectations of our communities. Now, when you want to see if you're being authentic, start making choices that are centering your needs.
I feel like we probably have viewers and listeners that may be interested in more, how do I say this? So part of what we're here to discuss, obviously, is the moment we're in, particularly reacting to the political climate. I think we both have a very fine-tuned lens around anti-Black racism and white supremacy, and just being constantly, resisting, right? I also imagine that we have white allies that are listening, that are probably very curious about how they should be showing up in this moment. I think last week we saw, I think, several examples of how white allies were trying to find their voice in the moment. So I guess you should just go ahead and get to that, and just, do you have any thoughts or perspectives for white allies that are looking for ways to respond to the moment in solidarity?
Yeah. Well, we have to get out of performing allyship. Again, it's like allyship can become something that can feel comfortable. So it's like, we want to be allies. Okay, we started buying the books, and we started doing the workshops, and we started doing the social media posting, right?
Put the Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter, the banner in front of your house.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Like on my car, and I have the shirts. But as I've often said, allyship is about going to your front lines. Like, what is your front line? And your front line isn't trying to get behind me. Your front line is going to the real tangible work of disrupting white supremacy, which means that you actually have to allow your heart to break. You have to move through this utter disappointment, this deep discomfort, right? And that's going to maybe make you look like you're not being effective. But like, for me, the internal work of dismantling white supremacy is the future. It's not necessarily about the marches, it's not about going to the protests. It's about, how do you learn to go and name this disappointment, this trauma, the trauma of whiteness? That you've been born into a system that was created only to perpetuate violence on the bodies of Black and brown people. Like, you have to name that. You have to stick with that discomfort, and get out of this tendency to want to document what that looks like. Fuck the documenting, go and sit with that and let that discomfort disrupt you. Let it begin to bring insight into the ways in which you're subtly maintaining the system and how you're interacting with other white people, with other Black and brown folks. Allow that discomfort to let you see this inherent anti-Blackness that's always functioning.
I will say, and I've never told this story before. I can't believe I'm
Mhm.
telling it now.
That's
Um,
okay, girl. This is a safe
putting up,
space.
I'm sharing, I'm sharing everything.
It's a safe space.
My parents, my parents had me later in life, so they
Yeah.
were very much of the Jim Crow era, and so I
Mhm.
grew up hearing stories about white supremacy. I mean,
Mhm.
I was not naive. I was very aware of I was very aware of racism and white supremacy, and yet I was ill prepared for meeting very excited, very aggressive, anti racist allies, masterful performances, so well that I was even
Mhm.
not completely full, but probably more full than I would have admitted to myself, and being disappointed when they weren't willing to go the
Yeah.
distance,
Mhm.
being heartbroken even
Yeah.
once or twice. One feeling like, of course, there's always the seduction of cynicism, right?
Mhm.
Like where you're like, oh, I should have known, but
Mhm.
just how easy it is to just slip back into it. And
Mhm.
I mean, because to be perfectly honest, there's even social capital extended to being an anti-racist in some
Yes.
ways. So in some ways, you're able to kind of multiply your white privilege while
Right.
seeking to resist it.
Right.
But just being, and I didn't have the tools like to
Mhm.
be profoundly disappointed by comrades
Mhm.
that when it was, and so when I would
Mhm.
challenge them, it would be very, and then they would feel fooled because
Mhm.
as I've learned that I have to sometimes tell people, I'm
Mhm.
from Atlanta.
Mhm.
I'm a
Mhm.
very different kind of Black person. Like
Mhm.
I grew up, I how do I put this? I stand up for myself, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't, and I think that even some of the most well-meaning white anti-racists, I think sometimes prefer to be around people of color that won't challenge them
Yeah.
very directly.
Yeah.
And it's and I'm like, I challenge stuff. Like I'm
Mhm.
not gonna let that go. So I guess just being disappointed, and I think many of us go through that, right? Where
Mhm.
it's like you think you have a comrade, an ally, and what do you do when you're disappointed? And then that goes in the space of like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Know?
Yeah. I think that's a really common experience that many of us have, particularly if we're in the work. Actually, we don't even have to be in the work. We can just be in the world in Black bodies and having to experience the disappointment. Actually, for me, it feels like betrayal.
Betrayal,
It's,
that's the word. Yeah,
you know,
betrayal. Mhm.
like you say one thing and then you fall short. Um, and for me, I guess in my practice at this point in my life, I just recognize that this is the reality. I go back, to my 20s and just, when you're in your 20s, we knew each other in our 20s. Like we were just our heads were full of like all the discourse, all the radical this and that, and the
The
theories,
poetry and the
the poet.
theory and
Yeah,
the
it's like we were of that era where it was like we have to have a theory before there's an
you
action.
can't leave the house without a theory.
you know,
You can't do
like
anything without theory.
it's like you need an analysis before you act. Like what's your
What is
analysis?
your analysis? And we were serious about it.
That's right. It was like a pop quiz. Like it would be like, "What's your analysis on Palestine, Israel? Go."
Oh.
You're like, "Where? What countries are those?" I
You know,
I was coming from Rome, Georgia. Like the struggles were basic. I was just trying to be gay. Like I had an extended into solidarity across like countries and nationalities, and
and here
struggles.
we are.
And here we go. Right, here we are. Um, you know, but like I just, one of the things that stuck with me in the theories from back then is Paulo Freire, where he talks about,
Mm,
it's the oppressed that will liberate the oppressor. And I knew that to be the truth, but it was so hard for me to accept it, as a young person, in my 20s, just moving through these activist spaces. It was like, no, like I can't do that. But like as I've gotten older, particularly as I've moved into, contemplative practice and, just develop this awareness of myself, it's like, yeah, just being myself actually just becomes this mirror that reflects back, to oppressors around me that, oh, like this is what's happening. Like this is your impact on me. And I'm just giving it back to you. You know, I'm showing you. You know, and I think about, for me, the I've what's helped me to understand the work around white supremacy is linking it back to the work that I'm trying to do around dismantling patriarchy. You know, as a cisgender male, male identified person, like just understanding, okay, what does it mean to undo patriarchy in this particular identity location? You know, and the work, well, and the labor that female identified and trans folks and gender nonconforming folks and gender and non-binary folks are doing to educate me about my participation in this binary system, you know, and knowing that that labor is ultimately them doing that for me, and just saying, okay, how can I really, first of all, not take that labor for granted, and to really absorb that labor and commit myself to, you know, to really, quite honestly, a multi-generational plan of dismantling patriarchy, right? That yes, it's about me doing my work, but it's also about me teaching young folks about the work and doing the work. You know,
I feel like this is a good time for us to talk about the future and talk
yeah.
about where we hope, where we desire to see all this go. So what is your vision? Like what and I know it sounds kind of naive, but I'm just I do think there's something powerful about Black people imagining future possibilities. Like I think that, because I mean, how often do we get to do that? So where would you, like, what would be your ideal
Yeah.
what describe your ideal world, or where do you want all this to go?
Yeah. You know, I think the difficulty of that, it's the difficulty of it is us dreaming beyond the trauma when all we know is the trauma.
Hmm.
You know, and so I know that like when I dream, it is tinged by the suffering of this moment that maybe I'm still struggling to reconcile and heal for myself. But like in this future, like it's for me, the future isn't the absence of suffering. It's not the absence of struggle. I think to be human means that we will struggle to make sense of mind and body living on this particular plane of existence. Like I just feel like that's part of our work, you know, as being these kinds of beings, being human. But what I see is us having the capability, the capacity to be spacious beings, right? To be able to look into our experience and to notice the space, to be with the spaciousness instead of always shutting down, you know, and falling into the contraction. Because I think it's that space, that spaciousness, that openness, and I also call it vulnerability, where we begin to experience this deep evolution. You know, this capacity to know what we're experiencing, to know how we're feeling, to deeply disrupt our expressions of violence against ourselves and others, right? And to have a language that is deeply affirming, you know, that's deeply that's rich and not depleted. You know, I think our language about ourselves and about our communities is really a language that's really super depleted right now. It's a tired language, and I think that the future is about creating a new language to talk about our capacity to experience space and joy, but also our capacity to continue to struggle, you know, with what it means to be human at the same time. And all of this can happen together. You know, I love what you were talking about, you know, earlier, you know, particularly about joy. Like for me, joy is a revolutionary methodology. You know, Like that's like joy becomes, yeah, a weapon in a way, that we use joy to transform our situations.
I mean, one of the things that I have been clear about is I've witnessed so many folks that do movement work
Mhm.
where it takes their they leave the work
Mhm.
so much more hurt and in pain than when they found it,
Yeah,
when they started.
yeah.
And I've just always been very curious about like how do we stay whole in this work, and how do we take care of ourselves, and not just in a superficial kind of way, but like in a very deep way. Like, how do we survive? How do we remain? How do we have a sense of restoration in this work? And I think part of it is being connected to joy. I think
Yeah.
part of it is finding pleasure and finding desire and all of those things, even in the work. And it's very serious. It's very obviously. I mean, we're oh my gosh, right? Like the cost, the
Mhm.
stakes are can never they're extremely high.
Mhm.
And yet, like as you said, there's something very revolutionary about still finding a way to stay connected to a sense of joy.
Mhm.
And I'm just so
Mhm.
grateful you said that, because I think that now the practice of it is of course a
Mhm.
process, right? Because I think
Mhm.
we may have a sense of consciousness around how it's
Yeah.
important, but
Yeah.
even being willing to exercise it, man, it's something I struggle with, right? Just
Mhm.
wanting, you know, yeah, like the finding joy is in of itself a practice I
Mhm.
found.
Mhm. Yeah, I've I've heard so many stories, personally from people, from organizers, um, in other countries where like people are really struggling with severe stuff, with war, famine, disease, right? But there is this intentional space of joy, of literal like dance and fellowship and laughter, even knowing that in the moment of experiencing that joy, the next moment may mean that some of them will be killed, you know? But to know that, I think that I think that I want to bring this back to American culture. I think for that American culture, it's like we still struggle with death itself, right? And that disrupts our capacity to experience joy because death is always lurking to take our joy away. And death can mean not just the ending of life and the physical body, but death is in general meaning the end of something, right? The discontinuation. Impermanence, well, impermanence, change, instability, which is just life, right? I think we get sucked into that impermanence, and we say, what's the point of joy when in the next moment we could be dead, or we could be poor, or we can be hungry, or whatever it may be. And what I mean by revolutionary joy is that my joy holds everything, including death. I am joyful because that is my nature. My nature is to be joyful. And when I say joy, I mean, just to give more words to it, when I speak of joy, I speak of expansion, openness, space. I speak of having this agency to hold everything in my experience and not feeling as if I'm contracting and shutting down around the things that hold a lot of energy, but everything is there.
I
You know?
find I find that
Mhm.
for me, much of my sense of joy comes from the arts.
Yeah.
It comes from poetry and
Mhm.
literature and film and theater, and just constantly just being able to witness the beauty through the arts. I mean, ever since I was really a kid, and I'm just constantly reminded of having the arts connected to my practice of joy
Yeah.
is so important, because it even witnessing such tremendous despair, it connects me to a sense of hope. It connects me to a sense of my spirituality.
Mhm.
It connects me to a sense of of immortality in a way by reading
Mhm.
or watching or witnessing art that has, endured time. I think we both share an affinity for like Essex Hemphill, and I'm
Mhm.
sure we both found his work, the poet Essex Hemphill,
Yeah.
Black gay poet,
Yeah.
writer, and activist, and even the immortality of his words and his language. So
Yeah.
I think that's just been a tremendous force for joy in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, what you're expressing is this experience of transformation. Like art is the way that we're processing the struggle and returning it into something to reveal a deeper meaning to it. And I think that for me, coming to relationship with Essex Hemphill's work, which was purely by accident, because I was not in a context where people were going around teaching and quoting Black gay poets.
Not at Berry College.
Not at Berry College. And I thank God that you know the internet was coming about when I started college. Because I wouldn't have had access, to this just not just literature, just all the art of people like me transforming it into something that was beautiful and soulful, but something that was honest. Like the art was just telling the truth.
Mm.
When Essex said that, like, I am dying twice as fast as any other American between the ages of 25 and 30 or something, like it's just like, yeah, you know, like I'm sad, but I don't want to alarm people.
How did you find Essex Hemphill? I don't know if we've
I
talked
don't
about this
know.
before.
I think I was searching online.
Huh,
I
that's so
literally,
funny.
I was literally just like searching, trying to consume as much as possible about who I was, and of course it was, in the life, right, brother to brother, Joseph Beam, because I had access to the films, Tongues Untied, those early films. I was like, oh my God, that's me. Those are other
Mm.
Black gay men, you know, who many of them are no longer with us because of the epidemic, of the AIDS epidemic, but they were reflecting back to me this incredible beauty. I actually just rewatched Tongues Untied, maybe about, I guess it was in November. And I was just like, whoa,
I
like
mean, even
these are
now
my,
when the screen
yeah,
opens up, brother to
yeah,
brother, brother to brother,
yeah,
brother to
yeah.
brother, brother, it's like you just get chills.
It's the chills. It's like, it's a mantra.
Because I think Marlon Riggs is
Hmm.
reaching across time and space to
Hmm.
talk to us even now.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I always say that I think in so many ways I was sort of a Black gay activist created in a lab or something because I had all these forces. It's like, I don't think there was a choice for me because there were just always these forces. I don't even think I searched for it, but it just, like just having access to these texts and to the people. And I had so many people, elders downloading their stories to
Yes,
me.
yes.
And I felt this incredible sense of responsibility to continue the legacy and to use my work and my voice to amplify that lineage and legacy that I know we've spoken about.
Yeah,
But we're probably around the same. Like I was in college,
yeah.
initially at Morehouse,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
watching Tongues Untied, reading Brother to Brother and In the
mhm,
Life, and feeling this sense of connection. Although it's interesting, as I think as I've grown in the work, every time I return to the pages, it's almost like they affirm me even more because I think,
mhm,
I mean, as an 18-year-old, there were just certain experiences I hadn't had.
mhm.
So reading about them didn't quite, and then later I'm like, oh wow, I get what they were trying to
Yeah,
communicate to me.
yeah, yeah. And I've told you the story often that, Reginald Shepherd
Mm.
was, I would know, an elder of mine. He's now an ancestor, but meeting him randomly at Berry College and realizing, wait, you were in the life.
I know
No,
you.
I know. Yeah, I've read you
I've read your
before.
work.
you know, and that connection that we had where he was just like, I'm trying to take care of you,
Yeah.
you know, and the ways that I couldn't open to that because of my own trauma
Yeah.
and fear, right? You know, and just knowing that like that's the legacy. Like we have to reach out and grab people, even though people may reject us.
But I almost wonder if that's a way that we cope with trauma, right?
Yeah,
Like the fear that we may see ourselves in each other, and
exactly.
that and that being a manifestation of trauma. So rather than we would rather look away or turn away
Yeah,
than to see ourselves
yeah,
in each other.
yeah. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
because we're mirrors.
We're
Again,
mirrors.
we're mirrors for each other, right? And if I
Mhm.
haven't done the work to hold space for my own trauma, when you reflect it back to me, I'm just gonna blame you and then act violence on you.
And
You
it's so
know,
funny. Like I remember when we met, I was so in awe of your poetry. For
wow.
folks that don't know, Lama Rod is just an amazing poet. Like I just remember I was like, wow, I couldn't believe you could write like that. I mean, you would just craft these beautiful because you're yeah, I mean, you know, around the same age. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
my God, how do you have this voice? Like it was just so well formed and so just gorgeous writing.
it
I'll
was so
never
much of that was Reginald's. Well, you know,
yeah.
I just like when I was introduced to his work, I was like, this is a black gay man like me writing this really lyrical, beautiful poetry. It's just like his work is just like, I don't know what this means, but like I just love reading it. I love saying it, you know, and it's tugging at something inside of me, you know, and that comes from this deep reflection of the self and this willingness to like bear yourself in the work. Like
Mm,
I just think, you know, as artists, we have to take risks. Like you have to put everything out. Yeah, you have to put the love and the rage, everything out on that page, right? You know, because that's the work that we're called to do. We're called to be honest.
and that kind of serves as a full circle moment for
Yeah.
myself because when I was 17, 18 years old, I wrote this op-ed in a newspaper where I essentially came out
Yeah.
and I had a moment of like after you know after it hit and it was like one of those things where
Mhm.
it got some circulation so
Mhm.
now it's out there so everyone
Mhm.
knows
Mhm.
and well I mean it was confirmed I should say well I know y'all are snickering confirmed maybe that's a better
It's
word
confirmed.
and and I just remember having this moment of brief despair where I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Terror, really. I was like,
Yeah.
oh snap, what did I just do?
Mhm.
And I'll never forget, I had took my copy of Brother to Brother at the black and pink, the black book with the
Mhm.
pink letters, and I started reading the introduction that
Mhm.
Essex Hemphill wrote.
Yeah.
And this when I was like 18 years old or so. And I just felt the sense that it's gonna be okay. That it's gonna be okay. And I have a responsibility to keep fighting. Things would be easier for me. And I understood this is like 99 or 1999 or something. I was like, things are gonna be easier for me than it was for any of them. And
Yes.
I have responsibility to keep it moving. And I haven't looked back since.
Yeah. That's our labor for our descendants. You know, it's the same labor our ancestors did for us. You know, and the labor is being ourselves, regardless of what's happening in the world. We are ourselves, and then we are ourselves. We're practicing authenticity, and we know what's at stake. We know what the consequences are, but we do it.
I want to talk a bit more about healing. I
Yeah.
imagine that there are many folks in the audience that practice various kinds of healing arts.
Mhm.
Maybe they're in faith communities, maybe
Mhm.
they're practicing some form of therapy.
Mhm.
What would you
Mhm.
most want
Mhm.
people involved in any kind of healing justice
Mhm.
work? What do you think is
Mhm.
most important for them to know in terms of how they respond to this moment?
Yeah. To be honest, it's okay to break down. It's okay to not know what to say. It's okay not to be able to hold space right now for folks because this moment is about understanding how we need to be caring for ourselves, you know, and also how we need to be in communication with our communities and collectives. about what communal collective care looks like as well. And I'll also say this too, because this is the reality of things. There are a whole bunch of healers out in the world who don't know shit about healing. You know, people are trying to lay hands on other people, and that laying of the hands, you know, is an act of violence, because it's like you haven't done the work for yourself. You know, and I think, and what I see from a lot of young folks right now is that the urgency is propelling them into making choices in how to be agents of healing. And then I have to show up, you know, and say, but you're still not ready. Fuck the urgency. Like, you haven't done the work to step into that role yet. Because if you step into that role without having done the training, having gone through the process and the mastery, then you will just start enacting violence over and over again. I have to pull healers to the side and say, you need to shut it down.
But I do wonder on some level if there, and maybe it's not a conscious choice, but the sense that through trying to heal others, they'll heal themselves, that through trying to heal others, whatever broken parts they may be carrying will become whole.
Which is manipulation. Like, I'm using you to get something for myself. You know, like, I don't deserve to be an experiment for you to see if you can get healed through me. You know, it's like you have to, you know, as you used to say, the elders used to say, you have to go to the lonesome valley. You know, and that you have to move through that experience of being in this deep, uncomfortable relationship with ourselves and learning how to make sense of that in order to know how to be with the darkness and the discomfort of others. You know? So when I think about my path has been about learning the mastery of healing in my modality. And I've learned the mastery of healing through two ways. First is by being the student of masters, and secondly, by doing the labor for myself. You know? And then having done enough of this labor, masters coming and saying, okay, now you're ready to do something. Like, I didn't, you know, my title's Lama. I didn't buy this title from somewhere. I didn't go to, you know, to graduate school to get this title. Like, I went into a lineage to train with masters, right? You know, and that's another word for us too, lineage. Like, what's our lineage? If you're a healer, okay, what's your lineage? It's like saying, you know, back in the day talking about, okay, what's your analysis? You know, but like, I have to look at people and say, okay, I see you doing work. Where are you coming from? Who were your teachers? Who were your teachers' teachers? You know, what is this modality that you're doing? You know, it's okay to move through a lineage and to innovate it, you know, but like, who is holding you accountable as a healer? You know, and again, I see a lot of folks who are just like, I'm a healer now. I'm going to heal you, you know, and you know, and I have to pull a Whitney Houston and say, well, where's your receipts? You know, I'm not talking about a certificate. I'm not talking about a degree. That's all Western bullshit that's been enacted. Like, that's colonial settler bullshit, you know, around respectability. But when I talk about receipts, I'm like, who did you study with?
Who are your people?
Who are your people? Who are you accountable to?
I see we're getting lots of really powerful questions. So we'll definitely want to make sure we get to questions. But before we get to the questions, Lama Rod, are there any final things you want to share? Just to kind of, before we pivot to questions?
Yeah. I was finally, I just want to share, just about the times that we're moving through. Yeah, I want to reiterate that it's supposed to be bullshit.
Are you invoking bell hooks from Black is Black Aid?
Yeah, you're right. Like
I see
yeah,
you.
yeah, it's supposed to be uncomfortable, and it will continue to be uncomfortable. This is the darkness, right? And if you want to be a healer, then you need to be in relationship with the darkness as much as you want to be in a relationship with the light.
Mm.
We talk about the healing culture in American indigenous communities, medicine men, medicine women, right? Medicine people, the training of a medicine person in tribal culture is, at least from like my perspective, right? My relationship to indigeneity is that you have to know the lowest of the low. Like you have to see that for yourself in order to meet people where they are, to offer them what they need in order to be well, to take them where they need to be. I can't help you if I don't actually understand what darkness is for myself.
Mm. And what
Or
a
if I'm
journey that
afraid of the
is.
darkness.
If you're afraid of the
Yeah.
darkness. Yeah.
Like the healing that I offer is just an expression of the healing that I've done for myself.
Mm.
That's it. I don't offer anything that I haven't proven to be medicine for myself.
Mm.
So that's all I'll say.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna shift to questions. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Lama Rod.
All the time. I'm professional. This is what I do.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Our first question is: I'm struggling with remaining vulnerable in every space. I'm a Black, trans, non-binary person who uses they/them pronouns, and so it's very hard to claim space in a mainstream, head straight white world. I am exhausted, and I can feel my exhaustion eating away at my empathy and compassion for others. I am resentful and angry at those who have privilege and who choose to maintain that privilege. How can I work on my empathy towards others when that empathy really only feels like continuing to coddle white guilt and feels like doing harm to myself? Thank you so much for that question. And Lama Rod, could you
Yeah.
like to weigh in? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that when we're moving through these really violent spaces, like the practice has to be really like asking ourselves, okay, what do I need? Like how do I take care of myself? How do I create structures and safe spaces outside of these really violent places for me to experience restoration and care and being tended to? That's the balance that we're trying to enact. Yeah, many of us have to be in these spaces, where we're the only one and where we're witnessing these violences happening, where we're experiencing these violences happening towards ourselves. And then what we also need is also a way to step out of that into a space where that violence is disrupted. And this is where we talk about community and collective care. The collective and community has to be present for us as refuge, you know. Um, and there is a deep there's this really there's this I whatever we think we're doing to care for ourselves, we have to do more. We have to go even further, particularly the more marginalization we experience, in spaces, right? We have to meet that level of violence with an equally intense kind of self-care and self-preservation. And when I talk about self-care and self-preservation, I speak of Mother Audre Lorde when she says that self-care is self-preservation, which is political warfare.
Mm.
I I I rage war through my self-preservation, through the spaces that I'm able to cultivate for myself, the ways in which I'm able to be in relationship to communities and collectives that are holding me, and in turn, I'm holding them because it's a reciprocal experience, we're doing work for each other. But this work is about restoring one another, it's about holding one another, it's about allowing each other to grieve and to mourn. And that's another piece of it. We have to have more space to do skillful mourning, which we're going to talk about this weekend in the workshop. We're going to talk about what it means to skillfully mourn, not to get lost in the grief of the mourning, but to hold space for that mourning, to allow that energy to move through. And this last piece, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that, and this is the hardest teaching, I think, is that at some point we have to recognize the world for what it is. And for me, and for those of you who follow me, who read my work, I talk about acceptance. Like, we have to accept that shit is happening, and to accept that means that we have to allow our hearts to break. And when I let my heart break, I release energy, I release trauma, I release a lot of tension, and I let myself grieve, I let myself mourn, and I say, yeah, like, this world is fucked up, and it's fucked up that I have to be in spaces where that I'm a victim of this violence, and I let myself just touch into that. And that touching into that energy is going to actually open up the space. And the space is where I begin to operate from. That space is a point of wisdom and clarity where I'm able to say, okay, I'm seeing things differently now. I'm seeing how to disrupt this in a way that doesn't cost me this kind of violence against myself. It's about getting skillful, But again, go ahead.
No, did you want to?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would say. I don't want to keep going on. I know there are other questions, but I just wanted to offer that. And for me, it's not that I've gotten less active. It's not that I've gotten less effective. It's I've gotten wiser about how to maintain the work and sustain the work for the rest of my life. Because a lot of folks at our age, we're just in our 40s, right? In our early 40s, like, a lot of folks are just burnt out. They're set, they're done. I mean, there were older activists, in my teens and 20s, that would be like, give it a good 10 years, you'll be all done and set with this shit, and then you're going to get a job, you're going to buy your house, and you're going to say, fuck it, And I would hear, people would say that. People would literally be like, don't worry, you'll give it up. It's a phase, it's a phase. But I just would sit there and I would go, no, but this is my life. Like, I need to be sustainable for the rest of my life. What does that look like? And how do I take care of myself to go the distance?
Absolutely.
And this is how we have to get skillful with the work. Yeah.
Moving to the next question. Can you talk more about disrupting systems? The insurrectionists at the Capitol were surely disruptive. What is an analog of that in the spirit of radical love, compassion, kindness, and social justice?
They were maintaining the system. That was a reactivity to keep the system going. When I talk about disrupting is about telling the truth. I wasn't telling the truth. Like, you have to be situated in truth and clarity for disruption to actually be effective. It can't be situated in this intense reactivity either. When I'm disrupting, in the certain communities, people know me as a disruptor, because it's like I come to a moment where everything gets real clear. And I say, oh, I need to do this. Like, I need to say this thing. I need to stand up and say, no more. You can't keep going on. That comes from a point of clarity, experience of clarity, not a reactivity to discomfort, not a reactivity to anger, not a reactivity to a lie. It's like, no, I see this clearly. And the love is about wanting everyone to get free,
Mm,
you know? And that's the other piece of radical love. Like I want everyone to get free, even the people who I can't stand. I want to get free. I want Donald Trump to get free. You know, I want the people who've hurt me the most in my life to get free. Like
mm,
radical love means that everyone deserves to be free, not just the people that I like, but everyone. So when you see when I saw that, when I saw the siege last week, and I was like, no, that's not about me. Radical love, when someone's practicing radical love, you say, oh, that's about me too, you know.
mm, absolutely.
Yeah. Not just about this one group. It's
It may
about everyone.
be, it may be helpful to talk a bit about what you mean by be free or get free for the people that you don't, even the people you don't like. What does that mean?
Well, because well, first of all, we don't liking and disliking people happens for a variety of reasons, right? It's like, sometimes we just don't like people. It's like we don't like the color of their hair. We're just like fickle, right? But sometimes we don't like people because of the harm that they created for us. So there's this range of dislike, and so when I think specifically about people that I don't like because they've done something to me,
Mm,
they've created violence for me. um, I think about why they created that violence, and I often think about their suffering. People aren't suffering, or people are violent because they themselves are in a kind of suffering, a level of suffering that they don't actually know how to experience spaciousness in or around. So when I talk about getting free, first of all, I'm like, I want people to understand that there's this sense of space around everything, that they don't have to just react to this one energy that's arising. That they shouldn't feel trapped and shut down around one kind of energy. And when people get free from those kinds of sufferings, those kinds of like really uncomfortable energies, then like they will be different people. When people have space, they tend to be more in harmony. They tend to be more empathizing. They tend to be less selfish, right? About over prioritizing their needs.
okay.
You know,
Is it okay if I shift to the next question?
absolutely.
Dear Lama, what are your thoughts on cancel culture? How can we
Mm-hmm.
call in instead of call out when we are so full of rage?
I think so much of cancer culture is performative to begin with. The big public takedowns. you know, um, so when we're full of rage, again, it's like many of us actually do not have the tools and the methodologies to care for the rage. So when we're trying to call people out, all we're doing is responding to the rage, we're reacting to it, and that's a misuse of rage. The rage is there to show us that we've been hurt, right? And once we notice that and start taking care of the hurt, then we can go back to the energy of rage, and we can like really channel it into creating whatever kind of change that we want to see. But it's not a reactivity. It's a conscious, spacious channeling of anger. In the way that we talked about disrupting, just a little earlier. We can channel rage, in a really effective way once we are taking care of the hurt beneath the rage first. And then we talk about calling out, then like that calling out becomes deeply centered in the well-being and the care of everyone involved. Not just getting back at someone, not just performing and cutting down people. It's like, no, like I am doing this because I am clearly seeing that there's behavior that's out of control. And I want to disrupt this because I want everyone to be free from the discomfort that's happening. You know, I am calling people out because I want people to see. Well, let's step back, because I wanted to say something really quickly about calling in. I'm calling, you know, for me, calling in is where I begin with the work. It's like, let me call you in. Let's like create these spaces, that we can have this dialogue. Let's rely on the community, our collectives, to hold space as we go through this, Um, and I need to be very clear as I go through this process too, that I too am someone who has at times been out of control and needed to be held accountable as well. So we need to always remember that, you know. Um, I think sometimes we jump into call out culture because we get anxious and worried that we're going to be the ones being called out, being held accountable publicly. So we just want to jump it and just like become the one who's doing the calling out instead of the one who's being called
Mm,
out.
mm,
And that's how we perform our wokeness as well sometimes. Not all the time. I'm not saying all the time, but I'm saying sometimes it's how we perform wokeness by calling people out.
I'm one of the things that I think a lot about is, restorative justice models of community accountability.
Yeah.
I think especially I'm, certainly very sensitive to, especially within Black communities, how we relate to each other. I think that part of the logic of mass incarceration and criminalization is even how we choose to hold each other accountable, how we choose to punish each other, right? And so I'm always thinking through, like, are there ways, what are the ways that we can hold each other accountable that at the same time don't resort to any of the logic of tech or technologies of mass incarceration or criminalization. I'm gonna pivot to the next question. I want to move forward with love and compassion when people hurt me, but feel like I'm often still angry when others are ready to move forward with the resolution. How do I practice transformative justice with people interpersonally without minimizing the pain that occurred?
Read the question one more time if you
Oh,
can.
I'm sorry. Actually, I skipped over a question. I'm
Oh,
sorry. Um, I want to move forward with love and compassion when people hurt me,
okay.
but feel like I'm often still angry when others are ready to move forward with a resolution. How
Okay.
do I practice transformative justice with people interpersonally without minimizing the pain that occurred?
Well, I think it's that piece where it's like there's a resolution, but you're still in a certain place. And I just don't think that's necessarily restorative. I think a restorative process is really slow and intentional and is always checking in with people. It's moving at the speed of the work that people are doing for themselves collectively, you know. And if you do go forward in that process, like I think part of the process is ensuring that members have what they need in order to be with, to tend to take care of what they're still processing through, right? And to make it clear that like, there may be a resolution, but there's still tending to and healing that still is going on, right? That like you get to the resolution, it's just not over and done.
Mm, yeah.
Um,
Is it okay if I pivot to the next question?
mhm.
I'm a Black dyke and I'm full of fiery rage. No surprise
Yes.
here. I'm
I
trying.
felt that in the
Mm,
question.
I'm trying to channel. I'm trying to channel that rage into bringing pleasure to self-identified Black women, so that we focus on nourishment and always on divestment from whiteness. How do I harness this fire without allowing it to burn me up? Mm,
Mm. Hmm.
mm,
Yeah, that's 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 powerful. I would say to initially that, we're not trying to control it. We're not trying to, so we feel that, rage, what I heard from that is passion. Like there's a passion, there's a confidence, there's love, and that is all mixed up together. And I hear that really strongly, and so much of that work is giving all of that energy space to be there instead of trying to control it and shut it down. I'm not saying that you're shutting down, but like when I say shut down in this case, it's like we think that we have to like bottle it in something, like and to make it presentable and channelable. But like in fact, we're just trying to give it space and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And to also recognize that that energy is going to be a mirror for the folks, for the people that you're trying to be in a relationship with, and that may be too intense because you're doing work that maybe a lot of people aren't ready for, they're not ready to recognize, and we have to kind of move through the ways in which we're shut down because we're in a different place. And that's something you just have to be aware of, that. Go ahead, Charles.
I was gonna say, I think a lot about how to organize outside of the white gaze. And I don't want my work, my sense of self, the projects I take on, the causes I champion to be fully informed and invested in whiteness. I think a lot about, I talk to Black, I write, organize, and talk to Black folks. And I don't know, it always feels like an act of defiance. That doesn't mean, obviously you can't ignore white supremacy. We have to, as you say, that's the world we live in. We have to recognize it. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want my entire focus and lens to only be about what white people are doing, what's going on. It's like, you certainly fight white supremacy, you recognize it, but I won't sacrifice my desire to build with Black people, create institutions, create programs, create advocacy, create culture, create content. And I feel like, and it's a process, right? Because obviously we still have the boot is still on our neck, and at the same time, I just can't allow myself to. There has to be spaces to create joy, to create beauty, to create community, even among ourselves. That doesn't just revolve around what white people are doing.
Yeah, exactly, and the consequences of that, as perhaps as people who embody what that kind of expression is beyond the white gaze, like you have to sometimes go through these periods where you're invisible among Black folks or among queer folks, whomever we're organizing with, because it's outside of people's experience as well. I think about, examples of just people that I've known, particularly when I was younger coming up, where they was just like so far outside of what we understood about what we could be, that we were just like, oh, like what are they doing? Because we were much more interested in centering whiteness, in our collectives, right? And so that's a deep disappointment that we have to carry with the work, is that we will be unseen because we're actually living in a future that a lot of folks haven't caught up to. And that's what it means to be a prophet. That's like you're living in a future that's like part of the prophet's work is to live into the future, so you're there when people get there. So you're holding people when they get to that point of evolution, but it's a lonely task, it's a lonely work because you're always ahead of everyone. It's being a visionary, it's being a revolutionary. You see it and you go there, and then you have to wait for other people to catch up.
And sometimes there's a cost to being a prophet, to being forward thinking, to being a visionary. I want to move us to the next question. How do you balance dreaming for a better world and staying with and accepting the present? It seems like a contradiction.
Well, I go into my practice, like this is, my training, this is my belief system, and for me, it's everything is everything, as Lauryn Hill said, like everything is everything. And what I mean by that,
we need a playlist. We need a Lama Rod playlist because you are giving us the hits.
As I get older, I tend to speak in the language of 90s hip hop and R&B.
I will say I definitely wasn't expecting the emotional, the Destiny's Child reference. That one got me. I wasn't expecting that.
Listen, that's how I make it through the day. I've been listening to Teddy Pendergrass like nonstop the past 24 hours. When the ancestors descend on you, they're like, listen, like you need to revisit, our artists, our singers. Anyhow, let me get back to the question. So we are non-linear beings. We are non-linear, and that's what we're trying to realize in our practice, our spiritual practice, meditation practice, our non-linear expressions. When you're non-linear, you exist in multiple times at once. So you think that you're like here in this time, in this present moment. Actually, the truth is that we're both in the past and the future, as well as the present. And so much of the violence, it feels very subtle, but so a lot of this violence is trying to limit ourselves to just this one moment, when in fact we're having we're experiencing multiple moments at once. And that's what we're trying to evolve into, right? So we talk about, this is happening now, but we're also happening in the future. So we just like what we're talking about. We are, to be a prophet means that you're living in the future, but you haven't left the present. Not only have you not left the present, you're still deeply in tune to the past. You're holding all three times together, and you're living in all three times. And that's nonlinear expression.
Yeah. I think we have a final question. What practices do you use to find peace within yourself, and how can we activate that peace within others?
I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is gratitude. Gratitude is the practice of me recognizing that I am the recipient of countless acts of labor and kindness for my well-being, for my safety, my health. Is allowing that energy of gratitude to open my heart, to crack my heart open, to step into realizing that the world is actually full of goodness, even though the darkness and the harm seems to be really overwhelming and intense at times. But realizing that there is intense goodness happening, intense positive labor happening, that I'm a recipient of that. And not only that, I am an agent also of this labor, of this goodness, of this kindness as well. It's a reciprocal experience. And stepping into that energy, is something I return to every single day.
Well, that is such a perfect final response. And it was just joy talking to you. As always, I learned so much from your amazing insights, and I'm really grateful to just get to share space with you. Did you have any final words that you want to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just want to say how much I love you. Not like that, not like, but like I just want to say that like I feel like our relationship is an expression of like radical revolutionary love, and this is something that this friendship is something that I have actually been praying for years, to be in this intimate, close relationship with someone who mirrors me, you know, and mirrors me in a way that like I don't flinch, you know, to have this kind of love, you know, and to be with someone who knew me before, you know, whatever it is that I am now. You know, like, you know, who can like actually testify to the fact that I've come from something, you know, that I actually had to come from a lot to be here, that I've changed and grown, you know. So I lift up your work, you know, and your labor for our community, you know, the ways in which you are committed to our liberation, you know, as well. And, you know, and I lift up our ancestors, you know, for all those ancestors who never got a chance to embody the life that they wanted to embody, and that we are vehicles for them, you know, so they can see what it looks like, you know, to be happy, you know, and to still care and still do the work, you know. As
Thank you.
one of my elders said, and I'll leave this as the last word, one of my elders who used to organize with Essex Hemphill and Audre Lloyd, you know, one day she said, you know what, you are who we were praying for. And I think that our work together is to pray into existence our descendants who will carry on the work of liberation. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And this will not be the last at all. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
Thank you all so much for attending today. We hope that you will join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. This conversation was recorded. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it will be available on our YouTube channel at this same link and on our Facebook page. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and good night.